One of the skills that is underdeveloped in many product people is entrepreneurial thinking. So understanding how a business really works and understanding especially the viability aspect of it. That is something that I think will be the next learning curve in product that we're on already due to the economic crisis. A lot of product people are not familiar with how economic models work. They don't know how to read numbers and talk numbers with the finance department, for example. And that's one of the major skills that will not only propel your product forward, but also your career, because you need to be able to talk finance in order to enter certain rooms where this is the common language.
Welcome to the Product Weekend podcast with Brito, Moita and Tojal. We hope you enjoy.
Hello and welcome back to the Product Weekend podcast. I'm Tojal, here with my co-host Brito, bringing you episode 14, diving deep into entrepreneurial thinking within product management. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Tanja Lau, a seasoned entrepreneur and the founder of Product Academy, renowned for transforming product professionals into product leaders. Tanja's journey from literature to leadership has given her a unique perspective on the crossroads of creativity, education, and entrepreneurship within the tech industry. In this episode, we'll go into Tanja's own transition from an academic background to pioneering educational models in the product space, the evolution of learning in product management and how to foster an environment that embraces continuous growth and leadership, and finally, the crucial role of entrepreneurial thinking in product management, especially in understanding business viability. If you find our conversation enriching, please consider rating us on your preferred podcast platform and share this episode with others who might benefit. Your support helps us bring more insightful discussions like this one. Prepare yourself to be inspired as we explore how Tanja Lau has reshaped the landscape of product management education, making a profound impact on the industry and on professionals striving to ascend in their careers. Let's dive in. Hello, Tanja. Welcome to the Product Weekend podcast. How are you doing?
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I think it's going to be an interesting one. So I always like to get started with a very, hopefully simple question. So what's a recent weekend that you really enjoyed?
Good one. I liked my last weekend. I spent it in the mountains here in Switzerland. Beautiful scenery, perfect weather. I spent it in Valais, which is a canton here in Switzerland, in nature with my family, doing lots of sports. So that's a great combination that I always enjoy.
Perfect. So if you could give us a brief introduction into your background so you can understand better and maybe some people don't know you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, depends on what you want to know. I'm not going to start at kindergarten to not bore anyone. But I think a couple of things that might stand out in my journey are that I studied comparative literature. So I ended up in product more like by coincidence. It was never my plan. I never knew what it was until like probably later than most people figure out what product management. In hindsight, I have been doing more product work than I acknowledged back then, because a lot of things are maybe not named product management, or you don't get the title of product manager, but you still do product work. In my early days in my career, I was responsible, for example, for book series at a career network or for conferences. I worked in the publishing industry. So these are all products, right? But it's not what we typically think of in the digital space when we say product management. I think I've been applying a lot of the frameworks earlier, but I didn't have the words for it and vocabulary. And I just happened to then start in product management when I studied at UC Berkeley. I did a postgraduate degree there, and this was the first time I got in touch with the startup ecosystem. And I think if you have the tiniest spark of entrepreneurship inside of you in Silicon Valley, like you will start to just learn. And I met a couple of people, and instead of taking a job at Siemens that I already had signed basically in talent management, I spontaneously followed a couple of Spaniards that I had just met at UC Berkeley and co-founded my first company in Madrid. That were a couple of very unexpected calls for my families. I'm not coming back. I'm moving to Madrid, but I don't speak a word of Spanish. So I think it was a lot of unexpected twists and turns that brought me into product management. And I have only been building the vocabulary and the actual frameworks way past entering the space. And I think nowadays for many people, it's the reverse. They know about product management as a concept. They start reading the books and then they're trying to get into the field. For me, it was like a reverse kind of dynamic.
Yeah. And wow, that's a good way to get into the space. But nowadays, you're famous for being the founder of the Product Academy, right? It's not really a recent project, it has a few years already. But I would like to know more about it and really what inspired you to start the Product Academy. And really, what gap did you see in the market that made you want to start this project?
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking. Yeah, Product Academy was founded roughly 5 years ago. And the reason why it exists today, I think, is twofold. One has to do with my personal individual story. And the other one has to do, like you said, with a certain gap that I perceived for myself and for others in the market. The personal part is I ran into a burnout full speed in the last job before I joined Product Academy. Some people might have heard that story before because I'm now sharing it publicly, but basically I even missed my own wedding. I had to literally spend my wedding night at a friend's couch because I got taken away by an ambulance because I collapsed in the back room of my own wedding venue because I was so burned out. I hadn't realized I had a little daughter back then. She was 1 year old. She never slept, but that was not the only reason. It was really like over the course of several years, I had been fighting so hard for a transformation to a more product-led approach in the company that I was at. I had been trying to make people aware of what the function of product management was. And there was a growing disconnect between how I wanted to do things and how they were perceived, and also disconnect from the purpose of the company. And I had not recognized that as much. I had lost a lot of weight and I didn't realize. I kept trying on my wedding dress, and every time I went to the person who was supposed to alter it, like I couldn't believe that it never fit, but I didn't realize it was me like losing crazy amounts of weight that I didn't intend to. And so basically breaking down at your own wedding, that means you cannot deny the fact that something is wrong, right? I mean, you have to explain this to 80 people or more. And so that was a moment where I needed to take action and I needed to change things. And so I decided to quit my job and to take some time off. And so I spent 6 months thinking about what I wanted to do next. And it's a very uncomfortable position because usually when you quit, people expect you to know what's your next thing. And it took me a lot of courage to stay in that space and in that in quiet moment of not knowing what was next for me. And I decided then that I wanted to work by myself and get out of company politics that I was very annoyed of. I decided that I wanted to do something that had to do with learning and also something that had to do with the intersection of creating value for customers, but also being very entrepreneurial. And the thing is, by that time, I was already pregnant with my second child. And if you're a mother of 2, it's not so easy to find a job that you can do in part-time and raise 2 children at the same time. And I wanted to enter the job market again at a certain level of responsibility. And that didn't necessarily mean I needed to lead people. Actually, that was one of the things that I was not particularly good at that time. And still, I wanted to have a job that was very demanding, entrepreneurial, and challenging. So there are not a lot of part-time jobs out there like that in product still today. And this is a pity, but still I wanted to create it for myself. And so that was the selfish reason why I created Product Academy. So why can't I just have that kind of job in part-time? So till today, I'm still working less than 2 days a week. So usually it's 12 to 14 hours per week. And I have kept that rather stable throughout the last 5 years because my ambition is for whenever I am at my desk, to be the most productive and entrepreneurial that I can be. But there are other things in life that are equally important to me or more. And so I spend a lot of time on sports or with my children. And so I think that was the part that I said, why can't I create a job that has this combination of factors, the flexibility, but also the entrepreneurial challenge that I'm seeking? That was one part. The other part, as I said, was when I was in product and when I was getting into a stage of my career where I was leading people, I felt more and more lost and more lonely in this role. Because first of all, when you go to conferences, you often see other people presenting their stories of what worked perfectly for them and how they raised that money and how they built these amazing products. So I kept leaving these conferences feeling feeling like shit, to be honest. Why are we the only ones who are not getting it? I'm so bad at this. It didn't feel good. And so And I didn't have the courage to talk to others about it because I felt like, oh God, it feels like I'm the only one. I feel like an imposter. I never studied this. Like I studied comparative literature, right? As I said, so I moved into this field as an outlier somehow. And so I feel like I even owned that space in a way. And the more you're promoted into leadership positions, the more you feel and have this pressure on yourself that you need to have all of the answers. That was one of the things I learned later on, that you don't have to have all of the answers, but I demanded that of myself. So I felt like very lost and very lonely. And once I started opening up about this to others and we started creating like communities of practice, even across different companies, I realized like, hey, I'm not the only one actually. Like even those people who have read a ton of books, they're still a bit lost. People who have started talking to others, they still are lacking a certain amount of mentorship or guidance on this journey. That was one thing that I realized. And the second was like, I'm not the only one who has a very specific background and a specific amount of knowledge in some areas, but no knowledge in others. Everybody comes with their very specific backpack into product, right? Some people know a lot about UX, but they are lacking economics. Some people, they know a lot about entrepreneurship, but they have never, dealt with change management. There's lots of different areas that nobody knows it all, right? And so I felt when I was going into conferences or also like trainings, I often felt like this does not really fit to my situation. Like I know some of these things, but I would have loved to go deeper on other aspects because I don't know anything about those. So like the level of curation of these kind of trainings that I was attending to my specific situation was not enough for me. So I felt like, what if we had a place where we could all feel a bit less lost and less lonely. And we could also maybe find ways to tailor the learning journey a bit more to our own specific needs. And that was the ambition that I started Product Academy with. And I had a couple of hypotheses that I needed to check, of course, to see if that was viable. And so I checked if there were people out there who were more experienced, at least in some areas, and who were willing to share their knowledge, either at low cost or no cost, depending on the situation and what they would want in return, because I still want them to get something out of it. And there were individuals like me who were looking for some sort of guidance, but who wanted it to be a bit more tailored to their specific needs and who were willing to pay for it also, right? So I started to testing these hypotheses, and actually a lot of them turned out to be true for me, or at least to the degree that I needed them to be true for my business. And still, there were some other parts. For example, I thought that people needed or wanted to mix and match all the different subjects on the curriculum a la carte, basically, to their own needs. And that was one of the hypotheses I started with. So I had a ton of different courses, open workshops that you could like potentially then just book and combine. But one of the things I realized later on was like, a lot of people, they are craving this kind of curation, that somebody puts together a curriculum and tells them like, these are the things that you should be starting with, or these are the things at your level of the career that you should be focusing on. So nowadays we have a lot more curated programs than I originally intended to launch. And that is one of the shifts that I made along the way.
You think that's a little bit because of like the human nature of everyone. So we like, when we are entering a new field, we like to hear someone saying, okay, this is your trail to success. Follow this as much as you can, and so you'll be safe. And do you think that's something that promotes people to go with the curated ones instead of a la carte that make us make selections, and the fear of missing out the good opportunity will begin to appear, right?
Yeah, I guess it's a combination of factors. So I'm not a scientist that can tell you exactly about the inner workings of the brain that lead us to this need for curation. But I guess there's a lot of noise out there. And these days, like there's so much information accessible on product management, like even for free. Like you could think actually nobody would need a paid training any longer because there's so many great newsletters out there, so many great podcasts like Lenny's. If you could listen to that for hours, potentially you could get a lot of insights there that will propel your journey forward. But what I really believe is, first of all, you need to reduce the cognitive noise for people, because if they have to skim through all of this material and find their own way, sometimes there is this FOMO playing into the decision-making process that you feel like, oh my God, what about this topic? What about that topic? So people love it when you tell them like, read these 5 things for now, and that's enough for you to start with. Like this, like how much is enough? That's one of my big questions in life. And I think it gives you a lot of peace of mind when you can answer this for yourself. And sometimes it helps when somebody else tells you like, that's enough for now. Of course, there's much more out there, but let's start with this part here. So I think that's one of the things that helps a lot. Yeah.
Just another one. For people that still don't know your curriculum, what are you teaching exactly?
Yeah, sure. If I may, I would like to start with the question of who is teaching, because it's not just me. Sometimes I'm very much, of course, connected to the academy, and many people associate my name with the academy, but it's more than 60 people who are involved somehow and somewhere around our different offers as mentors, as trainers, as coaches. And for me, that is one of the important things about the academy. I could never do this alone because there's so many areas that I'm definitely not the best at. There's so much more to learn for me, and I love learning from the other trainers as well. And one of the things that is important to me is to bring in other product leaders, other product experts who can, first of all, teach product their way, because there's different ways to get this material across. And some people will respond more to one way of teaching, and some will respond more to another kind of content delivery. So that's like the variety of individuals who are part of our programs is, I think, one of the strong selling points that we have, because you will also find different ways to do product management, different ways to be a product leader. Some people are super transparent. I just spoke to Steffi Lawyer yesterday, ex-CPO from Doodle, and she just told me she has this messy Miro board where she drops everything. And at any point in time, everybody can access any document she's ever working on. She's not waiting until she's finished, until she shares. That's awesome for our students to hear. And there are some people who tell us we are taking some decisions based on intuition and we're not backing everything with data. Super important for students to hear, right? So those are bold statements, but it's good to hear there's a lot of different ways to do product work out there. And it's good to see what resonates with you. So I think I wanted to enter the conversation with that part, because I think it's really important to know that one part of our curriculum is about who you're exposed to. And so that's content-wise, of course, these people bring different forms of expertise to the table, but also personality-wise. I think it's really good to have these different role models. We have a lot of female trainers also who show us that it's possible to succeed in this very tech-dominant, male-dominated field. So it's really cool to see and be exposed to different personalities. And as far as the topics are concerned, we now have 3 different mentoring programs for different levels in your career. So we have Level Up, which is the program that we recommend for people who want to transition into product management or who are in the first couple of years of product management in their careers, or people sometimes have many more years of experience, but they've never done product in a modern and lean way, right? So they might have worked in a actually project management dominated field, and they still learn a lot of new things, although they have been in the field for a longer time. So it's very individual, the decision, but usually the people in our class are either transitioning or in the first couple of years of their career trajectory. And then Level Up Leadership is for people who want to prepare for their first leadership position. So typically senior PM, or people who have recently been promoted, because sometimes that just happens, but you don't feel prepared for that role. And we can talk about that later, maybe what that entails. But basically, this program is something I wish I had earlier in my career. Somebody who helps me understand like what product strategy really looks like, how to coach people, how to hire people. Like I could benefit a lot, I think, in hindsight from this kind of training. And the last one that we have is called Coaching Fundamentals. And this one is taught by Ariana van der Plas, and she teaches people, actually that's the only online course that we have, teaches product leaders how to effectively coach and empower their team. Yeah. And then we have a couple of other topics on the sidelines that we do for in-house trainings. For example, outcome-based product management. That's a 2-day course where we just teach the basics of how to work with outcomes, how to work with hypotheses, how to transform your roadmaps in a more outcome-driven way. So that's like a combination of different important things that can speed up the learning journey internally. And then there's a lot of other topics like economics 101 or maybe discovery for B2B. Like we have a lot of very specific expertise also, but I have less workshops now that we promote as open workshops, and more of these topics are now available for in-house training.
Great. Perfect. That sounds good. I hope a lot of people got interested in that, because there's a lot to explore there. And I just want to ask on this topic, is there anything that changed from the concept that you had initially to what it is now? something that you learned along the way that made you maybe change things around?
Yeah, I mentioned one of the things earlier in the conversation when I switched a bit from the a la carte approach to like more curated cut. Another thing that I think is really interesting is that at the beginning of crafting all this training material and these courses, I was very focused on the content. That was like taking up at least 90% of my mental space. Which frameworks do we focus on, and how do we connect the homework to the actual courses and workshops? And I think nowadays I'm very focused also and very aware that the learning environment that we create is a major success factor. So I think 50% of my energy goes into how we deliver the content and how we deliver the learning experience. And this involves thinking about the journey from the very first contact point they have with us, the very first message that they get from me. Is it a voice message? Is it a chat message? Is it an email? And how can we create a level of trust way before the course starts? Because we want people to open up in class. To get the most out of the learning, they need to also open up and tell us about their real challenges, where they struggle, what is hard. And they need to feel confident and comfortable admitting this. And for that, you need a lot of trust in the classroom. And that's why our classes are limited to 12 to 14 people max. And they're not recorded. This is another factor on why like our trainers also open up about how messy things are, how they screwed up in the past. Like these things you will not get on record. And that's, I think, why I doubled down on something that at the beginning I thought was one of our weak spots, is like the academy doesn't scale very fast. Right? Because I work part-time, I deliberately limit how much effort I put into the academy. I didn't create it with the goal in mind to take over Europe or whatever with my courses. Not, absolutely not. It's scaling very slowly, and that's now intentional, because the kind of connections that we are looking for and the kind of learning experience, that is something time. And somebody asked me recently, like, why don't you teach, for example, level up within a week? Because it consists of 5 course days. Like, you could just teach it in 1 week. It might be easier for people to travel to Zurich once if they're coming from other countries, which is happening more and more. That would be so much more convenient. But that's not how I believe learning happens, because a lot of the personal growth and learning happens in between the workshops. That's when people go back to their reality and see what works, what doesn't, what did I really understand, what didn't sink in yet. That's when they have interactions with their mentors, with their personal mentors. And that's one way how we personalize the learning experience, that you get matched with somebody that matches your challenges and can help with their specific expertise. That is when they apply things. So I would never skip that part in between. And I think I realized that more and more, that we are very much focused on in-person training, because this is where the network is created. These people are in touch months and years after they had their course, after they took their course, because they have created this level of trust between each other. They have spent lunch breaks together. This does not happen when you do online training. People will always log off for lunch, right? You cannot keep them online. I think what I thought was a weak spot is like, this doesn't scale so much. Like, I limit everything to these like small classroom sizes. This is our strong point, actually. This is why people come to the academy. They sometimes find us for the content, because they might be Googling like, okay, I don't know, product leadership, and then maybe they come across our offering. I don't do paid marketing, by the way. But if they find us, they might find us for the content. But what they love us for is the community and the learning experience.
Perfect. Well, I guess after all of this, we get more people interested in your courses. And now I wanted to get, and Brit is already logging in, which already checking. But now I wanted to move over to another topic, which I know it's very dear to your heart, and you already alluded to it, which is continuous learning, right? And this is, I believe, and I think we can all agree, it's a very particular and crucial topic when it comes to product management. But I wanted to hear from you. Why do you think continuous learning is really important in this field?
I think it's important for many reasons. One is in this specific job, I think there is such a richness of topics to be explored that it's really hard to ever master all of them, right? So we have to come to terms with the fact that we will probably never excel at all of the skills that are potentially applicable in product management. So there's always room to grow by definition, I think, because of all of the layers that product management brings to the table. from like design to change management on an organizational level to leadership issues to storytelling, like all of the things. So I think there's always room to grow. And that's why I think, again, the question like how much is enough is really important, because for some students, our courses are also not just about learning what they need to learn, but also understanding now it's okay. Like I can still be good at my job, even if I don't know about these topics yet, or this is not my strong suit. Like it's also about finding out what profile of product management you're looking for. I think it's the same as in entrepreneurship. Just because one way of being a founder doesn't work for you. For me, for example, I tried out joint ventures. I tried out accelerators and incubators. I tried out bootstrap. And now I'm a solopreneur. And that works perfectly for me right now. But just because I didn't like some of the other parts doesn't mean I'm not a good entrepreneur, right? And the same goes for a product manager. Sometimes it's also about finding out which combinations of talent do you bring to the table and what is the right context in which you can shine, right? That does not mean that you don't need to keep learning and growing, but I think you don't need to be an expert in all of the areas to do good product management. It's also about finding the right combination of talent in your team. And I keep telling people in the first session of our class at Level Up that I think product management is a bit like a negative of a photograph. The role is very much defined by the surrounding role. If you have a UX expert in your team, then you might end up doing less of that and benefiting from someone else's experience. If you have data scientists, if you have an agile coach, if you have, a tech lead, or if you don't have a tech lead, that massively influences how your role is shaped. And I think because it's not a term that is copyrighted and product management means different things in different contexts. So I think it's so important to also understand how can we cover all the necessary skills as a team, not just within one person. I derailed a bit from your question, but that's one of the things that I think is important to point out. It's never just, you need to look at it as a systemic thing and not just within one person, right? To also fight the imposter syndrome a bit, because that's something that's holding many of us back, right? And then I think the second reason why I think it's so important to keep learning is because it's fun. Like, what's the opposite of learning? Like, for me, it's boredom. And that's like the worst thing that can happen to me. One of my major fears in life is that I might get bored. Ever. Like, really. And so I think as long as you can keep learning, that's something that gives a lot of purpose, that creates a lot of momentum for people. And so I think even if in some context you cannot expect a promotion into a new title, a new salary or whatever, as long as you keep learning something that's meaningful to you, that's a reason to stay. That's why I think I keep advocating that people have and curate their own personal learning backlogs of things that they would like to learn, right? And I have been in certain contexts where I didn't particularly enjoy the industry. So, for example, e-commerce is not my thing, actually. So a lot of consuming more stuff and buying more stuff is not something that fills my heart with joy, let's say. But it was in a context where I could learn a lot about scaling a company on an organizational level. And that was on my learning path. And that was the reason that I stayed there. Sometimes just having really good mentors in a company, someone you can learn from, that's a major selling point for me to join a company. If I ever gonna join a company again, I don't think so. I think that ship has sailed. But that would be one of the things I would be looking for. It's like, how can I learn from other people in the company? Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question sufficiently, but those are just some thoughts that pop into my head when I hear continuous learning.
Hey everyone, Tojal here. If you're enjoying the Product Weekend podcast, we'd really appreciate your support. Please take a moment to rate us on your favorite podcast platform. Your rating helps us reach more listeners passionate about product management. Also, if you know someone who would enjoy this episode, don't hesitate to share it with them. It's a great way to spread valuable insights and support our podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and let's dive back into our conversation. No, that was great. And in that sense, picking up on the academy again, do you have any example that you can share from, because you've been going for a few years, of maybe a student, there is a clear example of how a program, so this continuous learning through your programs, affected their trajectory?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I have a couple of very different examples that come to mind. One is, of course, we had a student who was a bartender and he wanted to become a product manager. And he's one of the examples I keep referring to because he had such a determination to enter the field. And it took him, I think, almost 2 years to find his first job as an intern in product management. but he was so determined to manage it. He was eager to learn. He built a huge network here in Switzerland for himself by attending a lot of the events that not just we, but also others organized. He was willing to give back early on and pay forward, basically, before he got anything in return. So he was coaching others and sharing his experience of how to apply for product jobs before he got his first internship in product. And now he's an official product manager. But I think like the persistence that he showed, the determination, the eagerness to learn, that was super amazing. And he took one of our programs. So I don't want to take credit for the fact that he got the job, but I hope and I want to think that it helped a bit. And we had other examples. For example, like on Thursday, Anastasia Lomakina, she's speaking at one of our events in Berlin. She was an alumni of Level Up in Berlin when we did the program there. And she's now on stage talking as a head of product about what she learned on the way. And we had people who were hired by their mentors. That's not something that I will ever promise because it doesn't happen all the time. Great. But these things do happen. And connection is really relevant because a lot of positions get filled before they ever get published. So it's really good if you can build a reputation in the market. So I think like our community has given visibility to certain individuals who were willing to also start organizing events or be like more vocal in the community. And that's why we also make it a point, for example, also in Berlin with the events that we do there, to have speakers that have never spoken before on a stage. Because I feel like there's also this kind of bubble where we keep seeing the same faces on stage, right? Which is great because these people are great and they have a ton of knowledge to share. But everybody needs to get started at some point in time. And there's so many people who have a ton of value and are closer to the actual audience because they don't have 15 years of experience yet. And they belong on the stage too. So I also want to make it a point to encourage these people to share their stories. And that's why we also have formats like the Fail Night, where people get to share their stuff on stage. And these kind of things, this is really fun. And so for some, this is the first speaking experience ever. And that's also something that I think is so valuable to get these opportunities.
Actually, the Fail Night, having the courage to go into a stage and saying everything that goes wrong and being that the first speech you do, like public speech, that requires a lot.
Yeah. And I'm in awe with all of these people who do that. First of all, for being so vulnerable on stage, which I love, and it creates a lot of connection also between the audience and the speaker, but also for the companies who sign off on these talks, because we had someone on stage, for example, who shared that he leaked, like by mistake, he leaked like an entire list of customers with their contact details to someone by mistake. Like it just happened. And this was a breach of confidentiality, of security, of course. And they needed to inform all of the customers, like, fuck up, right? He was able to share that story and he got backing from the company to share that story because they were actually able to turn this incident around into something almost positive for the company because of the way they handled it super proactively. They learned something from it. They made sure they had new processes in place to prevent this from happening in the future. So I think we can learn a lot from these companies who embrace failure and not just say it, but really do it.
Wow. Yeah. Going back a bit for continuous learning, what strategies do you recommend for product managers that actually have, like, for them to integrate a little bit of continuous learning throughout the days, and for product managers that are really busy schedules?
Good one. Okay, so one thing I already shared earlier, which is I think it's really good to be deliberate about what you want to learn. So for me, I call it learning backlog, call it whatever you want, but knowing where your gaps are and what you're curious about and what you want to focus more on, I think that's the first step. So it doesn't have to be random. Although I love, like one of my favorite words in life is serendipity. So when good things happen to you without you forcing them. So that's something that I love. So sometimes I just like open random podcasts and just listen to them and I learn something that I've not been looking for deliberately. And I think that can expand our horizon a lot. And it's super cool. But it's also good to be intentional about your learning, I think. So that's the first step. I think for me, there are different layers to learning, right? Learning has a lot to do with curiosity. So what I love to do is to cultivate curiosity and to ask myself also, what kind of people am I surrounded with? And I like to surround myself with curious people because I can learn a lot from them, right? So people who read a lot, who expose themselves to different ideas, those are people whose knowledge I will be able to absorb too without reading all the books myself, without being exposed to all of these contexts. And depending how diverse your network is and how curious your network is, that has a major impact on your own learning curve. That's another aspect that I wanted to mention. And then I think, of course, also about making time for learning and finding the right medium for learning for yourself, right? For me, for example, I love running and I listen to podcasts all the time when I'm running. So for me, that's 8 hours of learning or 7 hours of learning per week that I do because that happens to be a good combination for me. I could never sit down and listen to 7 hours of podcast if I wasn't also working out at the same time. So also finding like the medium that works best, the time of day that works best for you. That's another important thing. And I personally, I don't obsess about reading every book that's been published. I'm going to be honest. I'm only halfway through Marty Kagan's new book and everybody else on the planet has already read it, right? I'm only half through Melissa Barry's new book on product operations because sometimes, yeah, I do that. I keep up with the latest publications, but I don't also force myself to, I don't know, ingest tons and tons of books. Like I believe that good books need to find you and not the other way around, but that's another story. But anyway, so I think making time for learning is something really important, but it also has to be joyful a bit. And it has to come from a need. And I think one of the things that I observe a lot is, and that's the reason why learning in many organizations is still seen as a cost center, is learning is detached from decision. And I don't know if you know that, but the bigger vision for Product Academy is actually to help create learning organization. So I happen to be in product. It was never my intention, as I told you in the early days of my career. But what I'm really interested in is driving an entire organization forward and building the momentum that you need for a learning organization. And for me, product is not a department. It's a mindset that is needed to build a learning organization, but it's not exclusive to this department, right? And we need to stop fighting and bickering about who is leading product. For me, it's more about how do we learn? And in order to be able to learn, yes, you have to expose yourself to different kinds of content and inspiration and people, but you also need to be better at learning how to learn, right? That's the second aspect that I think is very underdeveloped in many people. We always talk about testing and hypothesis and so on, but a lot of people have never crafted a proper hypothesis. I have taught this course for people at Google. I keep teaching people at Just Eat Takeaway in many big organizations. And I teach pretty senior people there. And at the beginning, I was like, my own imposter syndrome was like, oh my God, who am I to tell these people about hypotheses? They're like 5 or even more years into their career. But the thing is, we often don't take the time to structure our thought process and our decision-making process properly to really extract learning. And that's one of the core skills that I'm so fascinated by and that I keep focusing on. Is really decision making, the art of decision making, and decisions are the things that propel an organization forward. And that's why I really believe learning should be tied back to decision making. So if you are aware of what kind of decisions do I need to get better at or be more confident with, then that is a blueprint for what you need to learn. Don't know if that makes sense to you. Happy to hear your opinions on that as well.
No, it makes total sense. And actually, you can already created a perfect segue, especially because something we alluded to before in terms of leadership and really empowering product leaders. But even before going to that, I want to understand from your point of view, what are the key qualities of a successful product leader? What are the kind of the traits that you need to find in them?
And I am not so sure if actually they are so different from other kinds of leaders. There might be a part that is very specific to the area and industry that you're working in and how much domain knowledge is required for your position. That might also depend on who you're surrounded by. If you have enough experts on the team, you don't maybe need to be the most senior person knowing about this domain. It always helps to have a certain level of domain knowledge, of course. But I think there are some very universal traits for any kind of leader that are very useful, I think. And for me, one of the things that I believe, one of the skills that is underdeveloped in many product people is entrepreneurial thinking. So understanding how a business really works and understanding especially the viability aspect of it. That is something that I think will be the next learning curve in product that we're on already due to the economic crisis. But I've seen a lot of people get so much better at discovery related activities and getting better at understanding what is desirability and what do we need to build in order to create value for the customers. We have always been pretty good at feasibility. I think that's because of the project management nature of things and then also the engineering driven culture that we have. But I think we got better at desirability detection as a collective, let's say, in product. And now the next bigger learning wave is on viability. A lot of product people are not familiar with how economic models work. They don't know how to read numbers and talk numbers with the finance department, for example. And that's one of the major skills that will not only propel your product forward, but also your career, because you need to be able to talk finance in order to enter certain rooms where this is the common language. And I used to hate finance, right? And I'm still not the best at it. I'm coming from a literature background, like how non-finance and non-tech can it get, right? We're talking reading Goethe poems and translating them into Italian and stuff, right? That's where I'm coming from. But still, I managed to expose myself because I had to in the startups that I was involved with, expose myself to unit economics, understand certain key concepts of time value of money and so on, to understand how investors are thinking, how C-level people are thinking, because only then you will find the common denominator to have certain conversations and to detect also what kind of desires of your customers and audience are worth pursuing, right? Because it's not about like just listening to your customers. That's not enough. You need to find the intersection also between what works for your business. And for that, you need to really deeply understand things like cash flow. I've been in the position a couple of times in previous startups where we ran out of money. And that's not a good position to be in, you know? And if you understand, for example, when your next funding round is coming up, that will drive your leaders into a certain kind of behavior. And if you are familiar with that, you can expect that they will get nervous, that they will suddenly ask you for roadmaps because they need to pitch that to their investors. If you know how many pivots your company has left, how much cash they have left, that will tell you like how much risk you can take and so on. You need to know these kind of things. And also like on a personal level, it's good to know how solid your business is because they're paying your salary. I think that's something I would want to know if I was still employed.
So now it makes a little sense why you have Economics 101
yes.
at the academy, right?
Yeah, it's actually part of the curriculum of Level Up Leadership. And for many people, it's the first time, like we deliberately, as part of the homework, we asked them to talk to their CFO and come back with the balance structure of their company. And that's often the first time they ever see these numbers or they ever talk to someone in finance. And spoiler, these finance people are really nice people that are very willing to explain their stuff to others if they're willing to listen. Really.
Can you discuss a little bit of the importance regarding mentorship in developing product leaders?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not just for product leaders, I think for anyone. And maybe we also need to define the term product leader because I'm not sure if we all have the same mental model of this term. It's been used in the industry for very different things. So for me, when I say product leader, I usually use it for product executives. But I also believe that you can be a product leader without directly leading PMs, for example, on your team. And that's, I think, one of the misconceptions about leadership in general is that many product people wait until they have the title to start thinking of themselves as product leaders, right? And that's maybe another topic that we can explore if we have time left, but that's a muscle that you can train way before you're actually officially entitled by your job title to be a leader. But that's just like a little segue into another topic. So mentorship. What I can say about this topic is, first of all, a lot of people have never been mentored in their life. And what I assumed is that people just knew how to be mentored. That's one of the things I learned along the way in the last couple of years, that a lot of people don't know how to get the most value out of an interaction with a more senior person. And such a gift, if someone experienced in the field is donating time to you. For example, in our programs, you will have maybe 5 hours of mentoring with, an expert, a product leader, a CPO from a big company, right? Or also of a startup. And you suddenly have this opportunity to talk to this person. But I see students who don't prepare for these meetings, who sometimes even skip them without being mindful of someone's time. Like, this should not happen. So it's a skill to be mentored and to know which kind of questions you need to ask, which are the most pressing questions. What do you want to extract from this other person? And how to be also mindful at the same time. So I think mentorship is super important, but it's not just I'm taking something from the other person. I, on my side, if I'm being mentored, am influencing the value that I can get out of these interactions tremendously by being prepared, by knowing what I need to learn, by being specific in my question, by being polite and also giving mentors time to prepare. If, for example, I have a very specific question. So it's not so easy to mentor someone on the spot if they have very specific questions. Sometimes if you ever try, then you know that this can be quite challenging. So for some mentors, it's really nice to also have some time to dig up some resources, to maybe come with an example of a roadmap where they had time to hide some confidential parts. Like these things, they happen more or are more likely to happen if you give them more time to prepare. So I think mentorship is an art, and that's not the direct answer to your question, but that's something I wanted to say in general because I'm observing this, that I see a certain sloppiness when it comes to mentoring and people not seeing the actual real value and opportunity. And that's also a way to burn really good mentors, because if you don't respect their time and you don't show up for the meeting, they will stop mentoring. And so that's just something that I want to state here publicly. I think it's so important that we all are mindful of everyone's time in general. That's something that's the most generous gift that someone can give you. And so I think mentoring is super valuable. It can unlock a huge step in your learning journey in just a minute if you're exposed to the right person at the right point in time and you're asking the right question. So I think, again, that's an opportunity to take ownership of your own learning journey by understanding what kind of people with which kind of skills and experience should I expose myself to. And then, of course, one way is to be officially mentored because you're part of a program where somebody says, yes, I'm going to be your mentor and this is what it entails and these are how many hours we're going to sit together. But I think mentorship also happens by exposing yourselves to some people, asking them for support in a nice and polite way, respecting their time, asking for a question, posing a question, asking for help, even without having an official mentorship. So I think the first step is knowing what you need to learn. The second step is identifying who can help you on this journey and also maybe paying it forward for these people to be willing to help you. But I think most people are very eager and willing to help. I've rarely seen people turning down a genuine question or a genuine ask for support. Of course, sometimes they have to say, I don't have time. But then they often say, let me point you to this other person who might be helpful. Let me point you to this book that might be helpful. So usually they try to find other ways to help you. So it's always good to ask, but please do ask in a polite and nice way. And maybe find also ways to create value for the other side when you ask, because I think it's a give and take, and paying it forward goes a long way, I think.
So now we're getting to the end of our conversation. But before we go into our last section, I just want to talk a little about the future. And of course, we've been talking about many different skills. But if you had to really pin down what are the most valuable skills that a product manager should have in the next 5 years, what would they be?
I'm going to go with some very generic skills because I feel like despite, and I guess you're alluding also in the direction of AI and so on, like there's a lot of emerging skills that are very important, of course, to keep up with. But I'm still going to go with the skills I see in most of my classes to be very valuable once people acquire them. And I'm going to go with two skills that I feel I've mentioned here before, but I want to state them again. One is entrepreneurial thinking. So to really understand, and entrepreneurial thinking for me is a combination of understanding how a business works and what it's needed to drive a business in the right direction and to also do it responsibly, but also combined with a sense of agency and urgency. So this is something that for me is part of entrepreneurial drive, is when you understand like agency is what am I responsible for? What can I take accountability for? And what kind of freedoms do I need also to take that kind of accountability? I often see a very big mismatch between the accountability that people have in a product role and the freedom that they're giving to explore that role. So I think the sense of agency is I understand what I want to be responsible for, and I'm also making sure that I'm setting myself up for success. And urgency means I understand what has the highest priority right now. And I think if you have a high sense of agency and urgency, that's part for me as part of being a good entrepreneur. And the second skill that I wanted to mention for me is systems thinking. That's something that I myself am currently going deeper into because it's so fascinating. And I think it's so universal, the patterns that you can detect there. And for me, it's so important for all of us to zoom out and see the bigger picture because we're all part of systems, right? And the role that you play. If you change something, the whole system shifts, right? And so to understand how to influence a system, how to detect patterns in a system, and to think holistically, that's something that I think is so needed at different levels. Like whether it's taking responsibility for the product you put out into the world to understand what kind of implications they will have also in an ethical level, but also within an organization to understand how the roles are connected, how you see patterns of delays and so on in the system. Like that makes us, that puts us in the position to be less reactive and more proactive. And that's something like a universal skill that I would love to see more of. But I guess, yes, there are some emerging skills too that probably other people are more and better prepared to talk about. But yes, of course, AI is something to not neglect and not deny the importance of, even if your company's business model is currently not leveraging it yet.
And I think it's the last one prior to the sprint questions. What advice would you give someone that's just starting their product management career?
You mean someone who has already gotten a job as a product manager, who's someone who intends to transition to
The first weeks inside of the job already.
inside of the job. So I think it's really important to understand what kind of decisions are you expected to take. And I would expect a good leader to set your onboarding up in a way that you can take your first educated product decision within a certain amount of time, and to make your onboarding structured in a way that you can take that decision in that time frame, right? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of onboarding is usually structured around, here's access to, I don't know, Jira, and here's your access to SAP or whatnot, right? And so it's not about that. It's really, if you structure the entire organization more and more around decision making, then the onboarding will look very different than if you structure it around tools and access to information in general.
Perfect advice. So now let's go into our sprint questions. So the idea here is simple questions and simple answers. What is one digital product you would struggle to live without?
Miro, I think.
Okay. And what's the most underrated skill in product management?
Systems thinking.
Okay. Going back to the skills that people need, that's perfect. And if you could shadow any product manager or leader for a day, who would it be?
You know what? I'm not going to go with a product person. And
Okay.
not because I don't have anything left to learn. Absolutely not. There's tons of product people out there that I would love to be with for a day. But what I need most at the moment, I think, is to expose myself to people outside of our domain. I would love to, for example, spend a day in a Montessori kindergarten and see how they teach kids there. I would love to spend a day with homeless people and see how you can generate hope in a situation that is hopeless. I don't know, like all of these situations that have nothing to do with product, because I think what our craft needs is to expand into other areas and to learn and be humble and learn from other areas that have nothing to do with product. I would like to follow an extreme athlete and understand how they motivate themselves in tough times. Like all of these things, I would choose all of them over any product person. And that's not because I don't value a lot of my peers. Absolutely not. It's just because I think there's so much left to learn outside of that we could benefit from. Sorry, that was a very long answer for a very short question.
No, but that was a perfect answer and a new one. That's a new point of view. So thank you for that. And now we're going to go into our release notes. So Brito, are you ready?
I think I am. So, Tanja studied literature, and a lot of the things that are not named product management, although they are, really helped her in the first days of her career. She started also mostly on the reverse kind of dynamic that we are used to see nowadays. So nowadays we have a lot of theory and then the practice. Tanja did it all the way around. She co-founded her first company in Madrid. And then some years after running into a burnout full speed, she decided to stop, have a deep look into life. And after 6 months of understanding what to do next, she founded and she decided to work by herself, wanted to have a job that was really demanding, but also a part-time one. And that's really the golden nugget that sometimes we might try to find. And so she had to create the perfect job for herself. This was a joint venture of two different things. First one, a little bit of, if we can say, like of selfish way of creating, I want this job, but also because the market and everyone around was a little bit lost when talking about product management and everything. And the other part of the everyone is being a little bit lost is that everyone comes with a different background. For example, backgrounds in UX, background in QA, background in data. And that can be really beneficial for everyone to better understand what their path could be. And that's the way and the first reason regarding Product Academy. Uh, then with time going by, she saw that a la carte was not an option. At least was not the option that most people were actually looking for. And nowadays they have a lot of curated courses around product management and other topics inside of Product Academy. At the beginning, the focus was very much in content. Nowadays, is much more on creating the learning environment instead of just the content itself. So they need to tell us what is hard and need to be comfortable with that. Normally, it's about 12 to 13 people just to preserve the intimacy of the learning path as well. And one thing, it's not a full speed, fast paced one. It's fast paced in terms of intensity, not in terms of time, because time will take their path as well during the realization of learning, not only in Product Academy, but in our lives. So that's something that was really important. It's divided in three different sections. So it's level for transition, level up leadership, and finally the coaching fundamentals. And then you have other good needs and treats around the way. Community and the leader and learning experience is really what keeps Tanja joyful in the professional life as well. So her biggest fear is being bored. And that was something really interesting to hear. So it's really good to know what you want to learn. That's a thing that you, when you have busy schedules, really need to be sharp on. It's good to be random, but if you have really a busy schedule, please understand your product backlog, put some urgency inside of it, and then go on and start learning bit from bit. It's like that story of the apple a day keeps the doctor away. In this case, we can shift it to learning. But it's important to surround yourself with curious people as well. If you don't find them, maybe you have to be the one and try also to find curious people around you. You have a lot of communities, I'm sure. If you're in Portugal, we have a lot, but also in Switzerland and other places. So making time for learning, find the rhythm. The heart of decision making and the decisions is really what makes the organizations go further. So for each product leader, they really need to master this heart of decision making. And the product leaders, we need to understand about the domain level knowledge that's needed. So sometimes you don't need to be the complete expert of that domain. Others you will need because the organization says so in terms of needs. So two things that are really important for product management as well is the entrepreneurial thinking and also learn to talk finance. We are seeing a lot of product leaders, and for Tanja, product leaders are mostly product executives. They don't need to have someone that's reporting to them, and they can be really making their path and learning how to be the product leaders and being a product leader, even if you don't have the title for that. So mentorship is really something that's a two-way system. So when you are someone that's being mentored, you really need to have that skill as well. Learn how to be mentored. You need to go and be prepared. You really need to be mindful and have patience with your mentor. So it's a two-way, and we can never forget that we are people by the end of the day, and mentorship is a heart, and we have to have that in mind. For the next 5 years, what Tanja thinks is really that agency and urgency will be something really important. So understand the rhythms and accountability, and also understand the priorities. Those are like key for our future, and also system thinking. So learn how to zoom out, see the bigger picture, and understand some patterns and think a little bit more holistic. That will help you better structure your organization and also better decision making. And this was it.
Okay. There was a lot there. I hope you're happy, Daniel, with everything you shared. There was a lot of content. I think it's going to be a big lesson for everyone. And right now, I only have one more question is, how can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. That's usually where people can find me the easiest. But also, if you're around in Switzerland, we have a community there. I usually try to attend at least some of our events if I can. And there's the Product Academy Summit happening on June 13. We are hosting our first conference, and we deliberately made the tickets very affordable, starting at 149 francs, because we know that a lot of education budgets have been cut. So this is an event that we're hosting not to make money, but to really bring the community together. So in case you're around or you want a good excuse to travel to Zurich, then that might be it. And I would love to see you there. And then hopefully also with the product weekend, we find ways to meet up and join forces between the community.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much for being with us and for this conversation. And let's stay in touch.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Tanja.
Thank you. And that's it. Thank you for listening to the Product Weekend podcast. If you want to check all other episodes, head on to our website or YouTube channel, and please follow us on LinkedIn to stay up to date on future Product Weekend events and the Product Weekend podcast. Also consider sending this episode to that friend who could really benefit from this content. I'm sure you can think of at least one. For now, this is Tojal signing off. Just one last thing. Remember, the weekend's over, but your product journey is just getting started.